the deed, or I'll make sure you never see a dime of what's left." My father-in-law said that to me in a hallway outside my mother-in-law's hospital room, 3 hours after her funeral arrangements had been finalized. He said it quietly, almost pleasantly, the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. Then he walked back into the room where his son was crying and closed the door behind him. I didn't cry. I didn't sign. I walked to the parking garage, sat in my car for 11 minutes, and started making a list. But before I tell you what happened 6 days later, I want to ask you something. Leave it in the comments. What is the one thing someone in your family did that made you realize you never really knew them? I read every single one. My name is Faye. I'm 31 years old. I'm a title officer at a real estate escrow company, which means my entire job is reading documents that other people sign without reading. I catch forged signatures. I catch fraudulent transfers. I catch the kind of quiet theft that happens in conference rooms and law offices while families are distracted by grief. It is, in retrospect, darkly funny that they chose me to target. My mother-in-law, Ruth, died on a Tuesday in March, pancreatic cancer. She had been sick for 8 months, and for most of those 8 months, I had been the one driving her to chemo, because her son, my husband Brendan, worked long hours, and her daughter, my sister-in-law Sasha, lived 40 minutes away and had what she described as scheduling conflicts. Ruth and I had grown close in that strange, compressed way that illness forces on people. She told me things she hadn't told Brendan. She told me about the property she'd bought in 1991, a small rental house in Tempe, Arizona, that she paid off entirely by 2008. She told me she had updated her will the previous spring. She told me she wanted it to go to Brendan and me. What she didn't tell me, because she didn't know, was that her husband had been planning the opposite for years. My father-in-law's name is Dennis. He is 64 years old, retired from a career in commercial insurance, and he is the kind of man who mistakes confidence for competence. He has an opinion about everything and a grasp on very little. He never liked me, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I was the wrong kind of daughter-in-law. I didn't defer. I didn't laugh at his jokes. I asked follow-up questions when his stories didn't add up. He called this attitude. His family called it his way. Sasha had always been his favorite, not because she was kinder or more accomplished, but because she agreed with him. That's all it ever took with Dennis. Agreement, flattery, the willingness to let him be right, even when he was wrong. Sasha had mastered this at childhood and never stopped collecting the benefits. For 8 months, I watched the family politics play out in hospital waiting rooms and around kitchen tables. I watched Dennis redirect conversations away from Ruth's wishes whenever they came up. I watched Sasha nod and smile and take notes on her phone. I watched Brendan, who loved his mother and hated conflict, excuse himself to get coffee whenever things got tense. And I watched Ruth, who was tired and in pain and trusted her family, sign things that Dennis put in front of her without always having the energy to read them carefully. I noticed. I didn't say anything yet. I should have. I know that now. The day after the funeral home meeting, I drove back to the house to drop off a casserole I'd made. Nobody asked me to. I just thought someone should eat. I let myself in with the key Ruth had given me, and I heard voices from the study. Dennis and Sasha, speaking in the particular low register people use when they think they're alone. I didn't stand there and eavesdrop on purpose. I set the casserole down in the kitchen, and I was pulling off my coat when I caught a fragment. Sasha saying, "She won't know what it means. Just tell her it's a formality." I stood very still. Dennis said something I couldn't hear. Then Sasha said, "Brendan won't push back. He never does. It's Faye we have to handle before Friday." I left the casserole. I walked back to my car. I sat with my hands on the steering wheel for a long time. When I got home, I went to my home office, opened my laptop, and pulled up the Arizona Department of Real Estate's online records portal. I typed in the address of Ruth's rental property in Tempe. The current ownership record loaded. Ruth's name was there, as expected, but there was a flag I hadn't expected. A quitclaim deed had been filed 6 weeks earlier, before Ruth died. Before she even stopped treatment. The deed transferred the property to a jointly held trust. The trust was named the DL Family Revocable Trust. Dennis Ally typed the trust name into the state's entity search. Registered 3 months ago. The trustees listed were Dennis and Sasha. Ruth's name was not on it. I pulled up the recorded deed image. You can do that in Arizona. The documents are public. I zoomed in on the signature line. Ruth had signed it. The date stamp put it on a Thursday afternoon in February. I checked my phone calendar. That Thursday in February, I had driven Ruth to a 4-hour chemo infusion. We had sat together in the treatment center from noon until nearly 4:30. I had bought her a ginger tea and a crossword puzzle magazine. I had driven her home at 5. She had not been anywhere near a notary or a deed transfer that afternoon. The signature was not hers. I know what Ruth's signature looked like. I'd seen it on a dozen documents. The R was big and looped always because she'd learned cursive in a school that drilled penmanship. The signature on that deed had a small, cramped R. Someone had tried to copy it, but they hadn't known to make that first letter generous. I took screenshots. I printed copies. Then I opened a fresh document and started building a timeline, the way I do at work when something doesn't add up. Except this time, it was my family. The chemo appointment, confirmed in my phone, in the hospital's patient portal, on Ruth's printed visit summary I'd kept in a folder because I always kept records. The deed filing, Thursday, February 14th, 2047 p.m., witnessed by a notary whose stamp I recognized. I looked up the notary's license number on the state database. Active. Located in Scottsdale. I wrote down the address. The trust registration date, 3 months before Ruth died, 2 months before she was taken off active treatment, which meant someone had started planning this while she was still hoping for a different outcome. I thought about the hallway outside the hospital room, Dennis telling me to sign the deed. I hadn't known what deed he meant yet. Now I did. They needed my signature too, probably a release of spousal interest in community property, or a waiver of some kind, to make the transfer clean. And they'd waited until the day after the funeral, when I was grieving and exhausted and presumably not thinking clearly, to ask. They did not know what I'd do for a living, or they forgot. Or they assumed that because I was quiet at family dinners, I was also quiet everywhere else. That was their mistake. My phone rang. It was Brendan. I let it go to voicemail. I needed to think without explaining. I called my colleague instead. Her name is Teresa. She's been a title examiner for 19 years, and she has caught more fraudulent transfers than anyone else in our office. I had texted her before I called. I need a favor. It's personal. It's bad. She picked up on the first ring. Teresa, I said. My father-in-law filed a quitclaim deed using a forged signature. I have the deed. I have proof. My mother-in-law was physically elsewhere when it was supposedly notarized, and I have reason to believe this was done to redirect the transfer of a paid-off property worth somewhere in the range of $400,000. I have 6 days before I think they're going to try to lock this transfer in during probate filing. How solid is your proof, she said. Airtight, I said. I have the treatment record, the nursing check-in log, my own phone GPS data from that afternoon, and the deed image with the signature discrepancy. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Faye, this isn't a civil matter. This is deed fraud. That's a felony in Arizona. You need to contact the county attorney's office, and you need to call the state real estate fraud unit. Tonight, if possible. I know, I said. Do you have someone who can walk you through the report? I thought about it. I had a contact, a man named Roy, who worked in the Maricopa County Attorney's Office on property crime cases. We'd worked together 2 years earlier on a case involving a fraudulent escrow account. He was methodical, he was thorough, and unlike a lot of people in bureaucratic positions, he actually returned phone calls. I had his cell number in my work contacts. It was 9:15 in the evening. I called anyway. He answered. Roy, I said. I'm sorry to call this late. He said, Faye, I'll be honest, this better be worth it, and I could hear the smile under it. He knew I wouldn't call unless something was genuinely wrong. I have a forged deed, a fraudulent notarization, a paid-off property, and a suspect who is my father-in-law. The transfer was filed 6 weeks ago, but I don't think they've moved to convert the asset yet. I have a window. He stopped smiling. How long do you have? I had estimated 6 days based on the conversation I'd overheard. They wanted to handle this before Friday. That was in 5 days. Then we move tomorrow, he said. Send me everything tonight, all of it. I hit send at 11:42. Then I sat in the dark of my home office listening to the house settle around me. Brendan was asleep down the hall. He didn't know any of this yet. I had thought hard about whether to tell him first. But I knew my husband. He would have called his father. He would have said in that measured, peacemaking way of his, "Let me see if there's an explanation. Let me give him a chance to explain." And in the 5 days it took to have that conversation, the deed transfer would solidify, the trust would begin probate filing, and the property would be gone. I couldn't let that happen, and I couldn't explain it to him without either lying or dropping a weight on him that he'd carry wrong, so I let him sleep. The next 4 days I went to work. I drove Ruth's old route past the treatment center because I'd started doing that and I wasn't ready to stop. I answered Sasha's texts with short, neutral replies. She was angling for a family meeting to, as she put it, go over Mom's estate details together. I said I was available Friday. She said, great, the house, 10 o'clock. She had no idea she was scheduling her own consequence. Dennis called me once. He didn't leave a voicemail. I didn't call back. On Thursday evening, Roy called me. He spoke carefully, the way he does when things are actually in motion. They had confirmed the defraud through a handwriting analysis of Ruth's known signatures from her bank records and the contested deed. The notary stamp had been used fraudulently. The notary herself had no record of the appointment, and her stamp had been in her home office, unaccounted for during the relevant window. They had traced the stamp's use to a document batch that had gone through a specific print shop in Scottsdale. The print shop had security camera footage. Sasha had been there, not Dennis. Sasha. That surprised me. It didn't surprise me for long. Dennis had the motive and the plan, but Sasha had the execution. She was the one who handled paperwork when Dennis didn't want his fingerprints on things. She'd probably been doing it her whole life, and it had never had consequences before. Roy told me not to come to the house Friday. He told me to stay home. He said it gently, but clearly. This is the part where we handle it, he said. You've done everything right. Let us finish. I said okay. I did not stay home. I drove to the house Friday morning and I sat in my car down the block because I needed to see it with my own eyes. Not the arrest. I'm not someone who needs to watch a person be handcuffed to feel resolved. I just needed to see the moment it stopped being a secret. There were 2 county vehicles parked in front of the house at 9:53, not marked police cars. Plain sedans, but with the kind of deliberate plainness that announces itself anyway. I watched Dennis answer the door. He was dressed for the family meeting. Khaki pants, a button-down, the clothes of a man who expected to run a room. He did not run this one. I watched him stand in the doorway for a long moment. Then he stepped back. The door stayed open. I couldn't see inside from where I was parked, but 6 minutes later, Sasha's car pulled into the driveway, and she walked up to the door still looking at her phone. And then she stopped, very suddenly, the way you stop when you walk into a situation you didn't expect. I watched her look toward the street. I don't think she saw me. I wasn't looking for recognition. I just needed the image of that stop, that moment of understanding arriving, to exist somewhere other than my imagination. My phone buzzed. Roy, it's done. They're being transported. Call Brendan. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. Calling Brendan was the hardest thing I did that entire week, not because I was afraid of how he'd react to what Dennis and Sasha had done. I knew he'd be devastated, and I knew that devastation was legitimate, and that he would need time. What I was afraid of was the simpler thing, that he would look at me and wonder why I hadn't told him first, why I hadn't made the decision alone, whether I trusted him. He answered on the second ring. Hey, he said. Are you on your way to the house? I'm not going to the house today, I said. Neither are you. I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down first. There was a pause. I could hear him setting something down on a hard surface. Okay, he said. I'm sitting. I told him everything, from the deed I'd found in the public records, to the signature that wasn't Ruth's, to Roy, to the Thursday afternoon when I was sitting with his mother in a chemo chair while someone was forging her name in Scottsdale. I told him about the DL Family Revocable Trust and who the trustees were. I told him what I'd overheard in the kitchen the day after the funeral. He was silent for a long time when I finished. Bren, I said. He said, my mom was in chemo. While they were doing that, she was in chemo. I know. Another silence. Then you should have told me. I know, I said. I'm sorry. I was afraid you'd try to resolve it before there was anything to resolve. He didn't argue with that. We both knew it was true. He came home that afternoon. We sat at the kitchen table for hours, not really talking, just being in the same room while the shape of his family rearranged itself around him. He cried once quietly with his hands flat on the table and his eyes down. I didn't say anything. I just put my hand over his. The property was frozen pending the criminal investigation. The DL Family Revocable Trust was flagged for fraud. Dennis and Sasha were charged with deed fraud and forgery in the first degree under Arizona law, both felonies. The fraudulent notarization added a third charge. Their attorney immediately began negotiating, which is what attorneys do, but the evidence was not the kind that negotiates easily. The print shop footage, the handwriting analysis, the medical records placing Ruth in a treatment chair when her signature was supposedly being witnessed 40 minutes away. Ruth's actual will, the one she had told me about in the quiet of a chemo waiting room, was located through her estate attorney. It named Brendan and me as the primary beneficiaries of the rental property. The fraud had been designed to circumvent that will before it could be probated. It had failed by 5 days. I don't know what Brendan's relationship with his father will look like going forward. I don't know what mine will look like with Sasha, though I suspect it will look like nothing at all. Those are griefs that will take longer than a fraud case to process. Brendan is a good man who had a family that used his goodness against him. You can love someone and still understand that they burned down the house. What I know is this. Ruth drove herself to every appointment for 3 years before she got sick because she didn't want to be a burden. She paid off that house by herself while raising 2 kids and working as an office manager because she believed in leaving something behind. She told me, during one of those long chemo afternoons, that she had always hoped Brendan would marry someone who kept good records. I keep very good records. I used to think the most important thing you could do for someone you love was protect them while they were alive. I know now, it's also this, making sure what they built doesn't disappear the moment they close their eyes. If you've ever had to fight for someone who can no longer fight for themselves, type Guardian in the comments. And if this story reached you, if you know someone who's been through something like this, share it. Because the quiet theft is the kind no one talks about, and someone needs to hear that it doesn't always work. I still drive past the treatment center sometimes, not because I need to, just because Ruth deserves to be remembered on the road she traveled. What happened to Dennis and Sasha wasn't luck, and it wasn't fate in any mystical sense. It was the natural result of a chain they built themselves, link by link, over years. They chose to steal from a woman who was too tired and too sick to defend herself. They chose to use a system, deeds, trusts, notary stamps, that they didn't fully understand. And they chose to do it to someone whose entire career is built on catching exactly that kind of theft. Every action they took pulled the next consequence toward them. That's not the universe punishing them. That's just how things work when you build something crooked. Eventually it falls. I think about the version of the story where I don't notice, where I'm too grief-stricken to open the public records portal that week, where I assume the family will do the right thing because families are supposed to. That version exists. It happens to people every day. The only reason it didn't happen to me is because I had spent years building something that Dennis and Sasha never bothered with. The quiet, unglamorous discipline of actually knowing what I was doing, of learning the details, of keeping the records, of understanding that knowledge isn't just useful at work. It goes home with you. There's something I've been turning over since all of this settled. Ruth paid off that house herself. She worked for it, managed it, protected it for 30 years. She did that because she believed in doing things the right way, even when no one was watching. That's a kind of integrity that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up in the paperwork, in the paid-off balance, in the will she updated quietly and told me about in a chemo chair when she was too tired to pretend things were fine. She had it. Dennis never did. And in the end, the difference between them wasn't luck or money or who had the louder voice at the dinner table. It was character. The kind you build when no one's grading you. I also think about Brendan, about how his goodness, his genuine, non-confrontational desire for everyone to just be okay, was the thing they counted on. They weren't wrong that he wouldn't push back. They were wrong about me, and the reason I could do what I did wasn't anger, even though I felt it. It was the steadiness that comes from knowing your ground, from having put in the years to understand your field, your rights, your options, from not falling apart when the situation requires you to be precise. I'm not telling this story because I want credit. I'm telling it because I know there's someone watching this who's in the middle of something similar, and they're second-guessing themselves. They're wondering if they're overreacting. They're giving the benefit of the doubt to people who stopped deserving it a long time ago. You are not overreacting. Learn the thing. Make the call. Keep the records. The people who count on you being uninformed are betting everything on that one assumption. Don't let it hold. Ruth left something behind, so did they. The difference is what it cost them.